During Donald Trump's first term as U.S. president, he had one big gripe with America's NATO allies. They weren't coughing up enough cash for their defense budgets. Back in 2014, every NATO member agreed they'd spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense by 2024. But fast forward a few years into Trump's presidency, and most countries were still nowhere near that target. And Trump, he wasn't having it.
I said, you got to pay up. They asked me that question. One of the presidents of a country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay, we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I encourage them to do whatever the hell they want.
He started throwing out threats, big ones. He even warned he might pull the U.S. out of NATO altogether. This is not fair for the taxpayers of the United States, he said. NATO members must fully contribute. His tough talk, along with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, did scare some allies into upping their spending. But now in 2024, the stakes are higher. Trump's allies are already crafting blueprints for a NATO exit, and European leaders are bracing for impact. The question isn't just whether Trump will follow through, it's whether Europe is ready to stand alone. So, how much does Europe truly depend on the US? And if America steps back, can Europe stand on its own? Buckle up, because this could get messy. Alright, picture this. 40 years ago, the world had just survived World War II, but peace was looking pretty shaky. The Soviet Union had locked down Eastern Europe like a boss, and the West was sweating bullets. Everyone feared the Reds might roll across Europe next, and guess what? The countries in Western Europe broke, divided, and their militaries were running on fumes. If the Soviets decided to push west, there was nothing to stop them. But the US wasn't about to let that happen. After throwing its full weight into World War II to defeat Nazi Germany, it wasn't eager for a repeat showdown in Europe. So, America made a big move. Not just for Europe's sake, but for its own future too. The first game-changing move? Money. Lots of it. In 1948, the US rolled out the Marshall Plan, dropping $13 billion. We're talking over $100 billion in today's cash into Western Europe to rebuild war-torn cities, restart factories, and get economies humming again. But there was one condition. Europe had to start working together, trading and cooperating instead of bickering like neighbors fighting over a lawnmower. And guess what? It worked. Germany got its industry back up and running. France's economy was finally breathing again. Britain managed to steady the ship. It was like watching a team of underdogs slowly get their groove back. But there was one big problem money couldn't fix. Tanks and soldiers were still a threat. With Soviet troops flexing just across the border, America knew Europe needed more than cash. It needed protection. So, in 1949, the US and 11 Western European countries formed NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. This was the ultimate you mess with one, you mess with all of us deal. The idea was simple. If the Soviet Union attacked any NATO country, all other members, including the US, would hit back hard. Suddenly, invading Little Belgium or fragile West Germany wasn't so easy anymore, because that would mean facing off against the entire NATO squad, plus America's military powerhouse. But the US didn't just sign papers and hope for the best. It went all in. American soldiers, tanks, missiles, and even nuclear bombs were stationed across Europe. There were US troops chilling in Germany, ready to go. Nuclear warheads sat quietly in bunkers in Italy and the UK, basically saying, "Hey Moscow, are you sure you want to do this?" And it worked. The Soviets stayed on their side of the line. They didn't gain another inch of Western Europe after NATO was born. Now, bankrolling Europe's defense wasn't cheap. The US was shelling out billions. But there were some pretty sweet perks. American businesses boomed, shipping goods and supplies to this revived European market. It also locked in the U.S. as the global superpower, calling the shots on trade, diplomacy, and everything in between. And perhaps most importantly, Europe finally calmed down, which meant less chance of the world plunging into another all-out war. So by the 1950s and 60s, Europe was looking pretty solid again. Germany had rebuilt and was rearming, even though that made some neighbors nervous. Britain and France had nukes of their own. The European economy was booming. You'd think America would pack up its tanks and go home, right? Well, not so fast. The Soviet Union wasn't backing down. In fact, it was doubling down. The Cold War was getting hotter, and nobody wanted to find out what Moscow might try next. Europe was still fragile, and the fear was that the second the US left, the Soviets would make their move. So the US stayed put. Bases in Germany, troops in Italy, nuclear bombs tucked away across Europe. America wasn't just protecting its friends anymore. It was locking down its position as the world's top dog. And that's how it's been ever since. Decades later, US troops are still there. The NATO alliance is still standing strong, and Europe is still looking over its shoulder at Russia. Because when you play the game of power, you don't just win and walk away. You stick around to make sure you stay on top. Instead of stepping back, they hit the gas, inviting more countries into NATO and basically extending their security coverage across even more of Europe. Why? Well, in the 90s, Bill Clinton had his eye on voters with Eastern European roots in key swing states. Yeah, politics was definitely in play. Plus, there was this underlying fear in Washington that if the US pulled back, Europe might get a little too comfortable doing things on its own. And, well, America didn't love that idea. But even though NATO grew, the US actually started cutting back on the number of troops it had in Europe. Sounds fair, right? Except Europe thought, hey, good idea, and slashed their defense budgets too. Big time. Most of that cash got redirected into social programs such as healthcare and long vacations. By the 2000s, this peace dividend left Europe with armies that were, let's just say, not exactly battle-ready. Fast forward to today, and this lopsided setup is a huge part of Trump's beef with NATO. He's out there saying, why are we footing the bill for Europe's security while they're chilling? And with the war in Ukraine now in the mix, Trump's also arguing that the US should dial back military aid and push Russia and Ukraine to just wrap things up. But like always, it's not that simple. Trump's got this chart, why Europe isn't ready for Trump's second term. He loves flashing around, claiming the US is getting ripped off by NATO, but surprise, he's kinda mixing things up. The US spends more on defense than all other NATO countries combined, but that's on its own military, not some NATO bill. Plus, Trump says other countries owe the US for slacking before, but it's more like they promised to beef up their armies and a bunch actually have. Still, Trump's not totally wrong. The US is definitely the muscle behind Europe's defense. There are about 100,000 American troops in Europe, and they bring the heavy-duty stuff. Long-range missiles, refueling planes, top-tier intel, and those US nukes? Yeah, they're NATO's ultimate don't-even-try-it card. So, when Russia stormed into Ukraine in 2022, guess who led the charge? The US. Sending more aid than the whole EU. And when Europe finally rolled up, some of their gear looked like it came straight from a Cold War garage sale. Trump's beef is that the US is in for $250 billion, while Europe, which is way closer to Russia, is barely paying up. But NATO isn't just a bill-splitting club. It's been key to US security since the 50s. Trump's the first president to actually threaten leaving. Congress made a law in 2023 to block a quick NATO exit, but Trump's allies are already cooking up workarounds like a pay-to-play NATO or pulling troops out but keeping some air power. If the US bails, Europe's kinda screwed. On paper, they've got 1.9 million soldiers, but good luck getting 300,000 ready for a real fight. Weapons? Old. Recruiting? Struggling. And without US nukes, cue a possible European nuclear arms race. Some countries like Poland and the Baltics are stepping up, and there's talks of upping NATO's spending target to 3% of GDP. But the rest of Europe? They need to hustle. The message is loud and clear. No more sitting back. Whether it's Trump stirring the pot or Russia and China making moves, Europe's gotta suit up and get serious. What do you think? Is this the wake-up call Europe needed? Drop your thoughts in the comments, smash that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more updates on the global power game. Thanks for hanging out. Catch you on the next one.